A lightning strike on Friday, June 28, 2013 in the Yarnell Hills area of Arizona turned into flames, triggered by dry and hot weather and strong winds. The blaze spread quickly and threatened to burn residential areas. A total of 200 firefighters were dispatched to the scene, including 20 members of the elite Prescott City Fire Department. But tragically, 19 of the 20 members died because they didn't have time to save themselves. In this story we will see how they are at a young age, they dare to take big risks dealing directly with fire for the safety of many people. Let's go to the next story. In a small town called Prescott, a coach and forest firefighter supervisor named Eric Marsh prepares to go to work by preparing his safety equipment. That day he was assigned with his team to help put out fires in the Tonto National Forest area, which now have burned more than 16,000 hectares. Before leaving, Eric said goodbye to his wife, Amanda. On the way to pick up a captain of his team named Jesse Steed, and he also with his wife and 2 children said goodbye before leaving. After that, another person who was picked up was Chris McKenzie, or commonly called Mac. A few hours later saw a helicopter with a full load of water heading for a puff of smoke, and they confirmed to Eric which point to flush. Then after that the water brought was dropped at a predetermined point. Eric's own team, they are busy making fire lines and fire breaks. They are working very hard to cut, burn some trees and make wide bulkheads so that the wildfire that is predicted to get there can be stopped and not spread everywhere. But not long after that Eric found that the hot weather was increasing and the wind direction was changing, so he was very sure that the fire would spin towards the housing. He immediately reported it to the center and asked for permission to bring his team down to build a new firebreak. However, the proposal was rejected because the center had ordered a Type 1 firefighter tasked with extinguishing the remaining fires. Eric of course couldn't force it because in fact he himself was a Type 2 extinguisher who was still in the training stage, or rather not yet certified. Shortly after, Smith's Type 1 firefighters arrived and Eric suggested that they immediately build a new firebreak in the area near the river. But Smith arrogantly ignored the suggestion because he didn't think he deserved to be ruled by a Type 2 squad. He even told Eric to remember his duty, which was to stand guard in the back and clean up the remnants of the Smith team's work later. And a few hours later, what Eric feared happened. The fire could no longer be contained and is now starting to spread to several residents' houses. Everyone panicked and ran for safety and fled to find a safe place. A few months later, Prescott, an unemployed and drug addict named Brendan McDonough, got the news that his ex named Natalie was pregnant. He immediately went to Natalie to ask about it, and it was true. The child she was carrying was Brendan's daughter. Brendan is also willing to take responsibility and apologize if he had decided before for no apparent reason. But Natalie was disappointed, immediately refused firmly. She did not believe Brandon would change, which she believed Brandon was an unemployed and addicted man who could not possibly support her life and her daughter. Finally, Brendan came home and was disappointed that he intended to steal a cell phone that was left in a parked car. Unfortunately, he was not aware of the presence of the police, and Brandon was easily arrested and immediately taken to the police station. A week later, Eric met a friend named Dwayne Steinbrink who had served as the head of the Central Forest Fire Department. Eric then told about his failure to stop the fire yesterday, and Eric was so upset that his team was still Type 2, so they couldn't act quickly. He also asked Dwayne to help him get official certification so that problems like yesterday would not happen again. 2 days later, Dwayne took Eric to meet the mayor of Prescott. In that meeting, Dwayne explained to the mayor what the advantages of having a Type 1 fire team in Prescott were. With Team 1, if there is a big fire, they will immediately act quickly, and the community will of course be very grateful to the mayor. Finally, after a long talk, the mayor agreed to help Eric's team.
Keep your powder dry.
Next day, he tried to change his fate by registering as a fire crew who was currently recruiting members. Unexpectedly, Mac turned out to have taught in the EMT class that Brendan attended, and he didn't like it because Brendan was an addict whose life was very chaotic. When Brendan expressed his intention to apply, without further ado, Mac immediately turned it down on the grounds that the vacancy had been filled. But suddenly Eric came out and said that there was still one place. It was during an interview with Eric that Eric immediately knew that Brendan was a drug addict because he seemed less focused, and Brendan also said that he was still under parole. Brendan boldly admits that he quit and the reason he joined was because of his newborn daughter, Michaela. He wants to change his life for the better for his daughter's future and begs Eric to give him a chance. After thinking for a moment, Eric finally came out of the room to borrow shoes from Mac and gave them to Brendan. Because at that time they immediately did the exercise to run to the peak. The new and old members easily followed the exercise, but Brendan, who was doing it for the first time, immediately felt weak and vomited. Jesse seems disapproving of considering they are training for certification and admitting Brandon is an addict, fearing that it will get in the way. But Eric prefers and sees how far Brendan will change. After reaching the top, Eric also gave a speech so that the new members rethink their decision to join, because being a firefighter is not an easy thing, especially after they get certification, which will require hard work and greater risk. After enough rest there, they went back down and met with Brendan, who had just almost reached the top. After all the members were disbanded to go home, Eric, Mac and Jesse had thought that Brendan had given up, but suddenly Brendan appeared from a distance. Eric, who saw it, was amazed after Brendan showed a photo that he had successfully completed his training to the peak. Even so, Mac still shows his disapproval of Brendan joining the team, even he doesn't want to accept when Brendan intends to return his shoes. After coming home from practice still shabby and dirty, Brendan also took the time to buy baby needs and secretly stored the items at Natalie's doorstep. Brendan, of course, really wanted to see and hold his child, especially when he heard the baby's cry, but every time he sent a need, Brandon didn't even dare to knock on the door of the house. He always did it secretly. All team members practice and make fire paths while occasionally answering impromptu questions regarding knowledge of extinguisher terms. When it's Brendan's turn, he gets the answer wrong, and it irritates Eric because Brendan's mistake could hurt everyone. Because of his mistake, all the members got 100 push-ups, and of course it annoyed the other members and they laughed at Brendan by calling him a donut. Especially Mac immediately vented by doubting Brendan's biological child. Luckily, Eric immediately intervened and reminded Brendan to control his emotions. Every day they always train hard. All firefighting procedures are trained, including learning how to protect themselves from fire by wrapping themselves in heat-resistant shelters. Eric also continues to emphasize that the shelter is the only way to survive if they are pressed and trapped in the middle of a fire. Not long after, Dwayne called and said that Eric's team would be evaluated when dealing with the Mount Chiricahua fire. Dwayne reminded Eric and his team to prepare and show their best. Eric immediately conveyed the news to his team members and they all looked very happy because after a long wait they now had the opportunity to become a team type 1. They left the next day. Again and again on the trip, Mac threatened Brendan not to throw a tantrum during the evaluation. Mac had been waiting for this day for a long time and he didn't want to fail to get certified, especially when his girlfriend would also give him a gift if he officially became a Type 1 firefighter. As usual, Brendan responded casually. Not long after, we arrived at the base camp of the Chiricahua Mountains. All firefighters, including Eric's team, were briefed on the weather and which points they had to face. After that came an observer named Hayes. He would assess the performance of Eric's team as well as later determine whether he passed or not. They departed by helicopter. When they arrived at the designated place, Eric's team immediately worked on making fire breaks. Hayes, who continued to observe, was also very proud because Eric's team worked very fast. After a long time, Eric moved his position to determine the direction of the fire. He also asked the weather and wind conditions to the center in order to determine how long that it will arrive at their place. With all his experience, Eric ordered his team to build a new bulkhead on the side of the mountain, in an effort to minimize the fire that would come. But at that time Hayes did not agree with the idea because Abby would still go down quickly. He was very confident because he had 40 years of experience in the blackout world, but Eric didn't want to hear. Even he was emotional and said that Hayes should not interfere and it was better to stay on his duties as an observer. Finally, Eric's team made a new bulkhead in the designated place, and after that Mac and Brendan immediately set fire to the side of the forest outside the bulkhead. Then they observed the development of the fire until the evening, and apparently Eric's idea worked. However, Eric felt guilty because he had been emotional to Hayes and he was afraid that a disappointed Hayes would even give his team a bad score. Returning to Prescott, Eric waited nervously for the evaluation results at the thought of his disrespectful behavior towards Hayes. When Dwayne called to report the results, Eric immediately hung up because he was pessimistic that his team would not pass the certification. When he felt guilty, Eric even vented his frustration by breaking a chair in his study. Not long after, Dwayne came and Eric immediately told what he had done yesterday, but it turned out to be not a problem because soon Eric came out and immediately ordered all his team members to practice how to take shelter in the shelter blanket. Dwayne was also very proud because they could do it very quickly, and after that the good news came. Now they have officially become a Type 1 fire squad. Eric finally named themselves the Granite Mountain Firefighters.
We need a name.
Granite Mountain Hotshots.
There it is.
Apart from that happiness, Brendan finally got the answer for all his efforts. Natalie was finally willing to open the door and meet him with Michaela. Brandon also reports that he has joined the firefighting team, and Natalie is proud to hear and know that Brandon has changed. When he allowed him to carry Michaela, even a dirty Brandon didn't want to dirty his daughter. But Natalie still gave Michaela to Brandon. A few days later, a huge celebration was held in the office.
Eric also gave his speech and he expressed his pride and joy because now his team has officially become a Type 1 firefighter. He also distributed t-shirts for his team. Dwayne also gave him a new chair and Eric was very happy to receive it. Everyone looked very happy that day except for Mac, who looked down. Brendan came over and asked what was going on. It turns out that Mac was dumped and his girlfriend had an affair with someone else. He was also kicked out of his girlfriend's house and had to move immediately. Hearing this, without thinking, Brendan immediately offered to live with him. Mac certainly didn't think that even though his attitude had not been good all this time, Brendan was kind enough to give him a place to stay. Their relationship was finally getting better. Over time, after 9 months, they became very close friends. Once Mac tried to be a good uncle by preparing for Michaela's arrival. Mac turned out to get rid of all the furniture that could hurt Michaela. But it turns out that the real danger they face is when Michaela has a fever. Neither Mac nor Brendan is experienced in dealing with fever in children, so they panic and are overwhelmed.
103? No bueno, man.
Luckily, Jesse and his friends came with their wives so even Michaela could rest easy in their experienced hands.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys.
After settling in the Chiricahua Mountains, they were also involved in a huge fire called the Dragon Fire in Arizona. Eric's team is tasked with siege to the fire in the north. They then make fire breaks and then burn the inside of the bulkheads with the diesel torches they usually use. In the thick of smoke, they worked bravely, and there was one moment that nearly cost Brandon his life. Brandon had lost focus and fell when he was about to return, but luckily Eric immediately grabbed him and walked away. In the afternoon, their attempt to corner the fire was successful and everyone seemed very happy with that. After successfully extinguishing the fire, all members are given a day off and they take advantage of this to relax and play with their children in the garden. At that moment, Natalie saw a thick cloud of smoke, and Eric called all the members who were on vacation again. The thick smoke that Brendan saw earlier turned out to be coming from the mountains, and the fire was called Guuuyyss fire. Eric also received an assignment from the center. 6 firefighters would be sent while Eric's team would be led by Jesse. The fire, which had been raging overnight, received a red flag warning, which means the weather at the location is at a dangerous level and can cause a large, sudden fire. Jesse then took all his members to the northern hill and they were assigned to build fire breaks in the juniper tree area, which is an old tree that is 2,000 years old. All members will start working according to their respective duties under Jesse's direction. They made a barrier as far as possible, and after that the outside was burned so that the fire went straight to the point of fire. When there was a spark carried by the wind, they immediately extinguished it by cutting a burning tree. Everyone there worked together, and finally a few hours later the fire was stopped and they celebrated with a group photo under a juniper tree. But unexpectedly on the way home, Brendan was bitten by a venomous snake and had to be rushed to the hospital. Luckily it was treated quickly and Mac waited all night for it to wake up the next day. Even Mac and his friends have been hunting and managed to cut the snake that bit Brendan.
Whoa, dude!
45 minutes, bro. That's good luck.
Not long after that, his wife and mother came to visit, and they were very proud of Brendan's success in stopping the fire, despite being a highlight in the newspaper. But on the other hand, Brendan's mother was worried and suggested that Brendan find another job for his daughter. After thinking that, Brendan then told Eric to stop. Brendan was also very grateful for having been given the trust and opportunity. And Brendan also explained that his plan to leave was for his daughter and wanted to find a job that was not too risky. But Eric didn't agree with Brendan's intentions. Brendan also couldn't do anything at that time other than accept Eric's final decision that Brendan would still work as a firefighter with him. Eric also conveyed this disappointment to Amanda, but Amanda was angry and disappointed because it was the same as Eric taking other people's rights to choose their way of life. According to him, it has made Amanda feel that their household is no longer cared for by Eric, so they don't have children. The debate became hotter, and finally Amanda came home and Eric went to Dwayne's house to calm down. They both told stories and Dwayne gave Eric a lot of advice that family is something that must be nurtured properly. He also suggested that Eric stop being ambitious, because everything he wanted has now been achieved. After almost all night, Eric came home and immediately apologized to Amanda. He also promised that this year would be his last year as a fire inspector. The next morning, Eric received a call that there had been a fire in Yarnell Hill due to a lightning strike last night. Eric immediately prepared his team and immediately moved to the location of the fire. On the way, he also told Jesse his intention to stop being a supervisor and suggested that Jesse be his successor. Arriving at the base camp, there were already 3 firefighters who had been given directions. Eric's team will be assigned to block the fire in the west, and they have also been provided with a safe place on a farm if something untoward happens. The 3 teams will work to contain the fire at some point.
You and Blue River.
And after all the residents were evacuated, then they were ordered to retreat. The mission was finally executed. Eric and all his team immediately headed west to climb to the hillside to make a security barrier. Arriving at the destination, Eric immediately divided the team into 3 groups, and all were assigned according to their respective parts, while he himself would observe the fire and weather conditions. After the line of fire was made, Eric immediately ordered Jesse to start the burning. At that time, Eric also took the time to apologize to Brendan for his selfish decision last night, so that in the future Eric will also help whatever Brendan wants. But in work, suddenly the plane came and immediately doused the fire made by Eric's team, because it turned out that the plane got the wrong coordinates. Eric also changes plans by sending Brendan to higher ground to monitor the fire, while the other members will make new excavations in the next hill.
Don't miss me too much!
Arriving at the destination, Brendan immediately made observations by measuring the temperature and wind speed. At first the weather there was said to be normal, but soon Brendan realized that the wind conditions had changed, and it was immediately seen from the flames that quickly headed for Brendan. Brendan began to panic, and Eric immediately ordered Brendan to get out of the place immediately. It didn't take long for Brendan to get down and run, but the fire was too fast, so he almost got caught in the middle of a huge fire. Eric also received a warning from base camp that the fire had crossed the first limit, and Eric's team was ordered to retreat to a safe place. Meanwhile, Brendan seemed to be having a hard time finding a way out because the smoke was getting thicker and the eve was getting hotter. Luckily, someone heard Brendan's position on the radio and immediately picked him up by car. Brendan was immediately taken to the car park and immediately joined the other team to save themselves to the main base camp. Meanwhile, Eric's team had reached a safe hill, and from up there Eric could see how the fire was rapidly devouring everything in its path. Eric and his team continued to observe the condition of the fire, while the large plane carrying water had yet to arrive. In the end, because there was no other way, Eric reported that he and his team would go down to the farm and try to extinguish the fire from there. Even Brendan, who had arrived at base camp, heard that the wind was blowing very fast towards the west and the fire had already passed the third limit. It was true, the fire had already been seen reaching the farm while Eric and his team were still very far behind. Without thinking, Eric immediately ran back and told his team to immediately make a deployment point as an effort to save themselves, because it was impossible to return to the hill. All members worked quickly to clear cut and burn several trees. Meanwhile, Eric reported his condition, that he was in the middle of a fire, and asked to be sent a large water carrier immediately. The conditions there were really chaotic and everyone panicked. Thick black smoke had enveloped. And it turned out that the plane couldn't see clearly where Eric's team was, so the water didn't drop. Eric could only resign himself to reporting that his team was completely surrounded by fire, and Brendan, who heard it from the radio, understood very well the conditions his friends were facing. But Brendan could do nothing but hope that a miracle would come to help his friends. Likewise with Eric, when the enormous fire was getting closer, the last step that could be done was to order all his members to coat themselves with heat-resistant selder. Help only came after the fire was completely extinguished, but they only saw ash everywhere. When trying to get to the location point, they also found the entire Granite Mountain team had been roasted to death. Even Brendan, who heard the news on the radio, burst into tears. All family members were immediately notified of the incident. At first they only knew that there was one survivor, and when Brendan was present before them, the whole family had completely lost hope. Brendan was unable to see the sadness of his friend's family and immediately left, blaming himself. Only Amanda firmly approached him and said it wasn't Brendan's fault.
Look at me! Look at me!
In closing the film, Amanda finally managed to let Eric go 3 years later. And Brendan always remembers his friends by visiting the juniper tree they once saved. Granite Mountain is one of the firefighter crews who managed to achieve Elite Type 1 status, and since their establishment in 2008 they have saved thousands of hectares of national forest fires. The lesson we can take from this story is how we should not underestimate a job because of anything. Every job is important and has its own risks. Likewise, firefighters, if you don't understand the risk, it doesn't mean that the risk doesn't exist, because every firefighter must be ready if one day they only come back in the form of a name. Being a firefighter, especially forest fires, is of course a noble job that we should appreciate. I hope this story will entertain you. Thank you and see you in the next video.